Weezer is the smartest pop rock band of all time. Not because of their lyrics, not because of their music, not because of Rivers Cuomo's education, but because they wear glasses. Yes, that's right, it was the glasses that made them smart. Because you and I both know that when it comes to timid guys wearing glasses, the first thing anyone thinks is and you see, nerds are stereotypically smart. There is definitely, for sure, no such thing as a nerd with an IQ below 120, which according to Wikipedia means that as nerds, Weezer has very superior intelligence or higher. An obvious statement for anyone that's listened to their music. And of course, as Weezer nerds, we have even higher IQs than that because we're able to appreciate the deep and painful truths that Rivers Cuomo sings about.
When I was younger, I used to go and tip cows for fun, yeah. Actually, I didn't do that.
Now I thought that, as a Weezer nerd, aka a smart person, I should give back to the community. Help all the non-Weezer obsessed simpletons get a glimpse of what true genius looks like. And what better way to do that than to show you Rivers Cuomo's 2004 Harvard admissions essay. I know what you're thinking. Why would I want to listen to an essay? But trust me, this is worth it. Not because Weezer's the smartest band in the world, which they are, but because the story this essay really tells is the dramatic rise and fall of an artist that's desperate for success. Plus, this makes the perfect sequel to my Rivers Rock Bottom video, which everybody said they wanted me to make a sequel of anyways. But more importantly, by the time I'm done this video, you'll be so blown away by the genius of Weezer that you won't even remember who Paul McCartney is anymore, which will make my future video on him even more intriguing. Stay tuned for that. But enough stalling. It's time to put on my Weezer glasses, stop trying to squeeze in a Bee Gees joke for the one dude in my audience that will love it, and get into the epic story that is Rivers Cuomo's Harvard essay. After the initial failure of my band's second album, Pinkerton, I decided not to return to school in the fall of 1997, instead setting out on a mission to develop creative methods which would allow me to be more consistent as an artist. Above all, I wanted to cure myself of the romanticism which I believed was to blame for my failure. Just a quick note, when Rivers says romanticism here, he's most likely talking about his aspirations to be taken seriously as an artist, which informed the changes in Weezer's sound from Blue to Pinkerton. Stuff like the honest and personal lyrics, the increased complexity of the music itself, the wild and unkempt sound, things like that. Throughout 1998 and 1999, I engaged in hundreds of song experiments. I filled notebooks and cassette tapes, I drew graphs, tables, and charts, I studied other songwriters' methods, I took hundreds of pages of notes on the creative process, mostly from Nietzsche but also from Goethe and Stravinsky. At first, I maintained a relatively normal social life, playing and coaching soccer and continuing my classical piano studies with Bruce Sutherland. Eventually, however, I became more and more isolated. I unplugged my phone, I painted the walls and ceilings of my bedroom black and covered the windows with fiberglass insulation. I disciplined myself to the extreme. My goal was to purge myself of all weakness so that I could write perfect songs as reliably as a machine. Ah yes, the perfect pop songwriting machine. If it weren't for that, we'd never have Crab. In all honesty though, this is probably one of the most important moments in Weezer's history, because it was a fundamental shift in how Rivers approached music. Instead of writing songs to express himself like he had up until that point, he now wrote songs to succeed, to make popular music. And the only thing that matters to a songwriting machine is finding the perfect formula for success. However, because Rivers had a distorted perception of what his weaknesses actually were, he ended up discarding some of his best instincts as a songwriter instead. And so this ended up being self-betrayal more than anything else. Most of the time, I believed that I was optimistic and happy. The song experiments, however, produced music of less and less joy, and occasionally I would fall into despair. At one point in September of 1999, I actually gave up on my mission and decided to go back to school, sacrificing my music career indefinitely. I contacted Dean Thomas Dingman to gain admission, but learned that I had missed the registration deadline by 2 weeks. I could only move forward with music. It's kind of crazy to think about how those 2 weeks could have changed everything. Because on the one hand, if he hadn't missed that deadline, he might not have Weezer today at all. But on the other hand, the music he was making at that time sounded like this. So yeah, I don't know, maybe it would have been a good thing for him to take a break. I struggled on for 2.5 years in all. I finally concluded that such intense focus on musical perfection was only scaring off any real inspiration I might have had. I decided I needed to broaden my focus onto a more practical, tangible goal in the hopes that the music would start to flow in service of that goal. I read in Nietzsche that great men like Julius Caesar, Cesare Borgia, and Napoleon found their genius through practical activity, on the battlefield, in the pursuit of worldly ambitions. They were not locked away in a study like me. I decided to follow the example of these men, step onto the battlefield, and pursue world domination. I hoped this goal would spark my creativity. Now see, this is where things start to get interesting. This is where we start to see the side of Rivers that I believe is responsible for his success as a musician and more. Because once Rivers left his study, he got punched in the eyes and had to start wearing glasses again, which made him smart and therefore his music good. Yeah, he had a unique approach. See, where other bands would try to write good songs to reach a global audience, Rivers was trying to reach a global audience in order to write good songs. Even though it sounds like a backwards approach, because it kinda is, I do believe that it's a testament to his intense capacity for self-discipline and the exploration of methodology. Because when Rivers sets his mind on something, he will go forward with anything to make it happen, regardless of how unorthodox the approach may be. And though it hasn't always steered him in the right direction, his willingness to experiment like that can be one of the greatest strengths he has. You'll see what I mean as this essay continues. World domination, or in terms applicable to me, commercial success, meant making the most of what I had musically, becoming active with my band again, and making an album and touring. I swallowed my creative insecurities for the sake of that success and revealed my songs to close associates in early 2000. Their positive reactions led to rehearsals, which led to performances. We discovered that during our long absence, we had only become more popular. Our failed album Pinkerton was now viewed by many critics and fans as great. With momentum behind me, I kept writing. At the end of 2000, we entered the studio to make our long overdue third album. So I've talked about this before in a bunch of videos now, and you guys know how I feel about Green and Maladroit. But the music itself aside, I have so much admiration for what Rivers did here. Because for all intents and purposes, the dude was extremely depressed. I mean, he was living in a blacked out house with fiberglass windows, for God's sakes. But by taking on this new ambition of world domination, he was forcing himself to move forward regardless of his own fears and insecurities, which is an incredibly difficult thing to do when you're depressed and have no self-esteem. So yeah, I may not really be a fan of the music it led to, but hey, I can't argue with results. The Green album was released in May of 2001, going on to sell over 2 million copies worldwide. We toured extensively, playing our biggest concerts ever. We performed on Saturday Night Live and the MTV Movie Awards. The album's success at radio and MTV, and in foreign markets where we had no previous success, seemed to validate the approach I had taken with myself and my art. I quickly became the opposite of the unconfident hermit I had been in 1998 and 1999. I now believed that my band would become the biggest band in the world, and that I was the man to lead us to that destiny. Weezer, the biggest band in the world. In retrospect, it's a funny idea, but it's not hard to see why Rivers would think that after the success of Green. I mean, have you seen his glasses? But here's the thing. To me, Green has always been kind of like a watered down Blue. The sound is similar but less aggressive. The melodies are beautiful but less experimental. Overall, the entire album is just a more safe and formulaic version of their first album. It keeps everything neatly within that pop song structure. So from that perspective, it makes a lot of sense to me that the album was so well received. Because, well, Blue was well received, and this was just Rivers giving people a more digestible version of that. But now that Rivers had found success and confidence, he didn't need to play it safe anymore, which allowed him to fully embrace his bizarre approach to being a rock star. And for better or for worse, that would kick off the next era of Weezer's music. I sought to cultivate the same ruthless practicality in my business that I'd achieved in my music. I studied the lives of Napoleon and David Geffen, Machiavelli's The Prince, and contemporary text on leadership and management. I gradually took over all of the business responsibilities from my manager and managed the band completely by myself. My performing, writing, and recording continued, but were now joined by my business activities, all of which together I viewed as converging on the one goal of world domination. I read books on business and negotiating. I hired a staff. I reformed our operations, negotiated contracts, consolidated power. I found it easy to gain ground in negotiations because no music business people wanted to play hardball with the artist. Furthermore, I believed we were able to grow with integrity as I could now make informed choices, seeing for once exactly how the business worked. Okay, this section pretty much speaks for itself, so I'll keep this brief, but can we just talk about what a legend this man is for a second? Just focusing on performing, writing, and recording alone is already no easy feat, but Rivers was somehow managing literally everything about being in a band all at once. That's crazy. And he even wrote Mo Beats.
I got more beats than y'all. Keep fishing, still seems small.
I'm just kidding, Mo Beats is terrible. However, I also steered us into many bitter battles, including 2 lawsuits and many other very intense negotiations. For example, in order to demonstrate our independence from the record company in the new age of digital media, I shut them out of the making of our 4th album, Maladroit. Instead, we financed and produced the album entirely ourselves, sending hundreds of copies of the finished product to press and radio, but none to our record company. The record company could only watch on the sidelines as the single quickly climbed the charts and the fans downloaded the promotional copies off the internet. At this point, we had what I believed was optimal leverage, and we renegotiated terminated our contract. I've always thought it was really cool, and punk, that Weezer bypassed their record company like that. But what Rivers doesn't mention here is how much of a control freak this made him. During the early 2000s, he was notorious for having basically no tolerance for any mistakes whatsoever. And according to guitarist Brian Bell, it even went as far as Rivers forcing him to pay a fine if he ever sang out of key at live shows. But worst of all, it isolated him once again, because being a tyrant meant pushing others away. Even the song playing in the background right now, which is from that era, is a testament to how alone he felt.
Please take me home. I'm so alone.
Ultimately, however, Maladroit was not the big hit that it threatened to be, selling only about 750,000 copies. I had succeeded in improving our financial arrangement, but not in making a hit album. The record company blamed my shenanigans for the downturn in our success. Many fans also criticized the music. They heard both Maladroit and the Green album as being mechanical and emotionless. I tried to evaluate the criticism objectively, but I made little progress. I had extinguished my faculty for self-criticism in 1998 to 2000 in order to make the comeback. Now I could not tell if my current predicament was just the classic case of an audience lagging behind the development of an artist, as in the case of Bob Dylan when he went electric, or if I had really lost something. I reacted defensively, calling the fans little bitches in an interview with Guitar World magazine. Now the fans were unhappy, the record company was unhappy, my associates were unhappy, and I was unhappy. I did not know what could be done to change that. This is what I like to refer to as the well-oiled machine breaking down. Rivers' perfect pop writing formula was now beginning to show its greatest weakness, that it had no soul. His self-betrayal worked for amassing short-term success, but it lacked the substance to carry them for more than just a few years. That's why the fans perceived his new music as mechanical, because he wasn't writing it from a place of genuine inspiration. Instead, he was relying on gimmicks, like dissecting pop music or pursuing world domination. And that was just never gonna work long-term. A general rule is that no matter what type of content you're making, fans can always tell when you're phoning it in. Sure, songs like Island in the Sun and Hashpipe may be gems from this era, but albums like Green and Maladroit could never have the same kind of impact as an album like Blue, because Blue wasn't just a collection of catchy songs, it was an honest album, and everything that made it resonate with people, like the emotional honesty and relatable lyrics, were largely absent from these newer albums, all because of his new approaches to writing music that began in 1998. I fell further into ego and vice. Still, deep inside I was having serious doubts. I asked myself, is my life really supporting the production of the kind of music I know I'm capable of? I had to admit that my music no longer gave me the feeling of sublime ecstasy that it once had. Although I had already written another large pile of songs for a fifth album, I put all plans to record on hold. There was a revolution brewing in my unconscious, soon to be. So back when I made my Weezer Worst the Best video, I got a lot of flack from people who thought I rated Make Believe way too high. And trust me, I get it, it's kind of a cringe album, but here's the thing. I'd rather have an emotionally honest, cringe album than a flat and lifeless, serious album. Which, let's be real, was the direction he was originally going in with those early album vibe demos. Now I won't lie, I do kinda like some of the demos from that period because they're unique for Weezer. They all seem to be about fictional characters instead of Rivers himself. One that stands out to me in particular is the song The Organ Player, which seems to be about the fans who hated on Green and Maladroit.
Casting necromancer spells, summoning demons from hell.
But ultimately, I would rather take the cringy, pussified lyrics of songs like Pardon Me over those dead inside sounding demos any day of the week. And that drastic change from flat and lifeless to cringe and honest was a direct result of that revolution that was brewing in Rivers' unconscious. In February of 2003, Rick gave me a copy of Daniel Ladinsky's translation of Hafiz's poetry, The Gift. After overcoming my initial aversion to all things spiritual, I decided to read some of the book because I trusted Rick so much. Henry Mindlin, in his introduction to the book, says, Hafiz wrote hundreds of ghazals, or love songs, finding ways to bring new depth and meaning to the lyrics without losing the accustomed association of a love song. He explored different forms and levels of love, his delight in nature's beauty, his romantic courtship of that ideal, unattainable girl, his sweet affection for his wife, his tender feelings for his child, his relationship with his teacher, and his adoration of God. I was struck by the connection between all these different forms of love. I recognized that feeling of sublime ecstasy I once got from music music was just one more of these forms of love. I had an epiphany. If the feelings these mystics get in union with their god is analogous to the feeling I used to get in union with my music, then their teachings for how to achieve their union should likewise serve to instruct me on how to achieve my union. A whole world of spiritual teachings therefore opened up to me for the first time since, as a child, I had decided that I was an atheist. I now read these spiritual teachings as coded instructions for how to connect with my musical creativity. For example, when Hafiz says, self-effacement is the emerald dagger you need to plunge deep into yourself upon this path to God, I read it as, self-effacement is the emerald dagger you need to plunge deep into yourself upon this path to musical creativity. Like this, I just replaced the word God wherever I saw it. I discovered a new path, which I believed was what I had been waiting for. If 1998 was significant because it marked a drastic change in how Rivers approached writing music, then 2003 was even more important because it was the year he learned to start over. That spiritual method of connecting with his musical creativity that Rivers describes here is actually the fundamental technique that he's been using to write music for the last 20 years. It's a technique that's helped him return to a songwriting style that is more reminiscent of his earlier work than most of what you'll find on Green, Maladroit, or any of those early Album 5 demos. And yeah, I did say that Green is a watered down blue, but that's only true in terms of aesthetics, the fuzzy guitars, and the general idea of the sound. The actual melodies, singing style, and guitar playing sound nothing like Blue, but that opening guitar solo to Perfect Situation? That slaps like it's 1994. I eagerly studied a wide variety of traditions, including the mystical poetry of Hafiz, Rumi, and Kabir, contemporary spiritual teachers, and ancient texts such as the Tao Te Ching. In accord with my understanding of these teachings, I abruptly dropped all of my business responsibilities and hard-won power. I isolated myself once again. I fasted and lost 15% of my weight. I took a vow of complete celibacy. I gave away or sold most of my possessions, my house and my car, and lived in an empty apartment next to Rick's house for the rest of the year. I settled outstanding lawsuits and reconciled myself with enemies. I apologized to many people. I volunteered 6 days a week at Project Angel Food in Hollywood, preparing meals for people with HIV. Well, shit. I guess make-believe really is virgin rock. Thus, my life made another extreme swing as it had many times since I was a teenager. I have been sometimes a tyrant, sometimes the most frustratingly passive person you have ever met, sometimes a socialite, sometimes a hermit, sometimes a rock star, sometimes a student. I have had little inner stability. During this later swing towards spirituality, however, I started a practice which may help me achieve some balance. Meditation. Rick Rubin sent me some books on the subject, but at first I would not read them. I thought that meditation would rob me of the angst that I believed was essential for my connection to music. All the crazy experiments I've tried in my life have always been in an effort to improve, maintain, or recover that connection. Eventually, however, desperate for answers, I read the first 3 chapters of one of the books, Ken MacLeod's Guide to Meditation, Wake Up to Your Life. His words hit me like a lightning bolt. I realized that, in a sense, I had been wrong all these years in trying to connect my creativity by violent means. For example, by mining my adolescent anger for Say It Ain't So, crucifying my leg for Pinkerton, or consuming tequila and Ritalin for Hashpipe. MacLeod says, these devices do not work in the long run because they draw on our system's energy to generate a peak experience. Peak experiences cannot be maintained, and when they pass, the habituated pattern and the underlying sense of separation remain intact. There's a common fantasy out there that the best artist is a tortured artist, that one needs pain to be able to produce something of value. Hell, I used to believe that too when I was a Weezer-obsessed teenager who wanted to write my own Pinkerton. But like Rivers points out here, it's not actually sustainable. Peak experiences, like moments of great pain or joy, will not always be there for you in your time of need as an artist. Instead, it's better to draw from a source that's ever present, the simple and ordinary yet eternally deep, which sounds like some fortune cookie bullshit, but it's true. There is a well of creativity within us all that can be tapped into without relying on extreme emotions. MacLeod and other sources I began reading showed me a new way to work. Instead of generating peak experiences for inspiration, I could strengthen my power of concentration through meditation so that I can get more and more inspiration from weaker and weaker experiences. Not only that, but the practice would make my life better and make better the lives of those that have to live with me. I started to meditate. Based! Sorry, I just really like meditation if you couldn't already tell. I'll continue. The technique I was drawn to is called Vipassana. It is taught around the world at over 100 centers and temporary camps. I started the practice 14 months ago, attending 7 10-day courses and serving as a volunteer at 2. Since then, I have found that the areas of tension in my mind, the fear, the anger, the sadness, the craving, are slowly melting away. I am left with a more pristine mind, more sharp and sensitive than I previously imagined possible. I feel more calm and stable. My concentration and capacity to work have increased greatly. I feel like I am finally much closer to reaching my potential. I now live in a small but comfortable apartment. I feed myself adequately. I took a class at USC this spring, the history of literary criticism, and enjoyed it very much. I take private lessons in music composition once a week from Bruce Reich, a professor at UCLA. I still volunteer once a week, now at the West Hollywood Food Coalition, feeding homeless or otherwise disadvantaged people. But most pleasant to me is that month by month, I have watched my creative flexibility returning. The music I have created over the last 6 months has brought me much enjoyment. I am returning to Harvard in the fall. Other than that, I am wide open to whatever else comes my way. And that concludes Rivers' Harvard readmission essay from 2004. Now, what did you learn about Rivers?
New glasses?
No, I mean, what do you think was holding him back in the early 2000s?
Probably misses his old glasses.
The reason I find this essay so interesting and why I wanted to share it with you guys is because of how it portrays Rivers' struggle with himself. In the late 90s, he decided to abandon his own instincts in favor of a more analytical approach. He tried to logically break down what makes music good while putting his own feelings aside. And to some degree it worked. He was able to create a very successful album with hits that are still played on the radio to this day. But the trade-off was that it came at the cost of happiness. Not just the happiness of the fans who didn't like his new music, but also his own. He lost touch with the joy of writing that once fueled him in the early 90s. And it was only after struggling and learning to reconnect with himself that he was able to find that joy once again. Which also directly led to the band's greatest commercial success of all time. The point is, I think that it's a lesson we can all benefit from. Even if we're not all rock stars like Rivers, writing 10 million love songs from the perspective of a high school kid, because there will always come a time in our lives when we'll consider self-betrayal in exchange for success, and it's gonna be tempting and deceptive. You might not even realize that you're doing it, but even if it pays off in the short term, it will almost always lead us away from happiness in the long run, which is rarely ever worth it. So I guess what I'm trying to say is, never get laser eye surgery, keep wearing glasses.